you asked this question, did you give this answer?
They have a line cite.
Line 11.
This has been asked and answered.
Just one question.
One question.
Question, and in each of these instances where you collected the stain, you personally initialed the envelope? Answer, I collected the stain, it was initialed by me. You were asked that question, you gave that answer, correct?
Correct.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, what I'm asking you to do is in that pile of coin envelopes that you have in front of you with the numbers that I just gave you, each of those numbers represents a different item number, does it not?
Yes.
What I'm asking you to do is to pull out the coin envelopes and with the item numbers for the blood drops found at the Rockingham property that at that August 23rd hearing that I just read to you from in this case has your initials on them.
It's still argumentative and
Sustained.
unintelligible.
Ms. Mazzola, do any of those coin envelopes that have been produced in court today by the prosecutor have your initials on them?
These alone, or
Well, I'm asking you about those. Those are the Rockingham, those have been purported to be the Rockingham blood drops.
no, they do not.
And in fact, Ms. Mazzola, whose initials on each one of those envelopes?
Mr. Fung's.
And Ms. Mazzola, let's, for instance, take item number 11. Item number 11 you collected without Mr. Fung being present, correct? He didn't observe it.
Correct.
The coin envelope here that has item 11 on it, whose initials are on it?
Mr. Fung's as
Your
fi-
initials, I'm sorry.
Counsel.
Mr. Fung's as the one who booked them, did the final packaging.
Ms. Mazzola, did you testify on August 23rd that for every stain that you personally collected, you put your initials on them?
This has been asked and answered.
It has. We've established that point, Counsel.
Ms. Mazzola, item number 11, he wasn't even present when you collected it, correct?
Correct.
Yet your initials are not on that envelope, is that correct?
Answered, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Correct.
Item number 7, and item number 7 was a stain that you personally collected on the driveway in front of Mr. Simpson's house, correct?
Correct.
And for item number 7, Dennis Fung wasn't present, was he?
Correct.
Would you please look at item 7 on this envelope and see whether or not your initials are present?
My initials are not present.
Item number 8, another item that you collected without Dennis Fung even being present, is that correct?
Correct.
Are your initials on item number 8?
No, they're not.
And are you saying that the reason your initials are not on these envelopes is because you didn't book them? Is that your testimony today, ma'am?
This states the testimony.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
You said that Dennis Fung's initials appear on that envelope. Is that because he's the one who booked the envelope?
He is the one who did the final packaging for that envelope.
Is it your testimony now, as opposed to August 23rd, that the person who actually collected the stain doesn't put his or her initials on the envelope?
Argumentative and also vague as to which case.
Overruled.
Back in August, I was under the assumption that I had put my initials on the envelopes, and I was wrong.
When you testified on August 23rd, did you say, I'm assuming that to be true, or did you say it was true, Ms. Mazzola?
Asked and answered.
It's argumentative as well.
Ms. Mazzola, in response to the question as to whether you initialed the envelopes at the August 23rd hearing when you testified under oath, did you ever say, I'm not sure?
Argumentative. Yes.
Overruled.
I do not remember if I said, I do not remember.
I'm going to show you testimony, just refresh your recollection.
Counsel, we've gone over it now. You've established the point.
As you sit here today, it is your current belief that Dennis Fung put his initials on these envelopes?
On these, yes.
And the reason he put them on these envelopes is because he was the one who was going to book them?
That he was the one who did the final packaging for that item, yes.
When you say the final packaging, what do you mean?
Placing the bindle containing the cloth swatches in the envelope and sealing the envelope.
And was the envelope sealed on the morning of the 14th, to your knowledge?
I do not remember.
Now I'll show you a group of a group of envelopes. Which would be following item numbers. Item 41, item 42, item 43. Well, actually, withdraw that. I'm going to focus a little bit. There were a number of drops that were collected at Bundy, is that correct?
Correct?
And they received photo ID numbers and item numbers, did they not?
Yes?
And the first item number would be 47,
Photo ID 112?
right?
Correct.
And the next one would be 48,
Correct?
photo ID 113, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Correct.
next one would be item 49,
Correct.
All right, record reflect the witness is referring to her field notes.
and the next one would be item 50, which is ID 115, correct?
Correct.
And finally, the last one in that series of drops is item 52, which is 117, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I ask you to take a look at these items. Now,
Hold
You-
on, let her look at the items.
sorry.
Okay.
Ms. Mazzola, you personally collected the blood drop stains that became items 47, 48, and 50. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do 47, 48, or 50 have your initials on them?
'49 does.
Sorry, I asked you first about
Oh.
47, 48, and 50.
Oh, excuse
Do
me.
those three have your initials
No.
on them? They don't.
No.
Now, items 49 and 52 have your initials. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you're saying now that items 49 and 52 have your initials because you were the person who was there when the package was ultimately sealed for booking
That I am the one who placed the bindle in the package and sealed it.
and sealed it. And when did that sealing occur, ma'am? What day?
I can't remember if it was the 14th or not.
And they would be sealed for booking at the evidence control unit, isn't that right?
Correct. Well, evidence processing room, actually.
Well, that's what you would do the sealing, but once they are actually sealed, then they're taken over to the evidence control unit to be frozen, isn't that right?
To be booked in and frozen, yes.
And so, to the best of your recollection as you sit here today, you sealed items 49 and 52 on June 14th for booking. Is that correct?
Sustained.
Well, to the best of your recollection as you sit here today, did you seal item 49 for booking
Yes.
on June 14th?
I'm not positive if it was June 14th or not.
To the best of your recollection, which day was it?
I'm not sure if it was the 14th or the 15th. I'm not positive.
Could be one or the other?
Could be.
How about item 52? Are you saying that the reason your initials appear on item 52 is because you're the person who sealed that envelope for booking on June 14th or June 15th?
Correct.
Now, up until the time that you saw photographs of these coin envelopes, didn't you believe that you had personally put your initials on every one of them?
Whoa. You can answer the question.
Yes, I believe so.
And so the reason you're now changing your mind as to whether you had in fact, as you testified on August 23rd, put your initials on each coin envelope for the stains that you collected, is because they're telling you that these are the original coin envelopes. Isn't that true?
These are the original envelopes.
When the district attorney showed you photographs of these coin envelopes, did they point out to you that most of the envelopes, contrary to your sworn testimony of August 23rd, didn't have your initials on them?
I do not believe so.
And did you realize that when the prosecutor showed you the coin envelopes, that if your sworn testimony of August 23rd was correct, then the absence of your initials on some of these coin envelopes could mean that the original evidence may have been tampered with, in your mind?
Sustained.
Well, when the prosecutors showed you those photographs, up until that time, you believed, to the best of your recollection, that you had written your initials on the original coin envelopes at the scene on June 13th. Isn't that true?
Yes?
Would you agree, ma'am, that if your testimony on August 23rd was truthful and was accurate, that that would mean that these envelopes were not the original envelopes?
Sustained. Speculation, counsel.
And before you testified on direct examination, Ms. Mazzola, did the prosecutors tell you that they wanted you to testify at this trial that your August 23rd testimony was false?
Your Honor, this is not.
Sustained. There's counsel. Without the court reporter, please.
Now, after you left Rockingham for the second time, you said you returned to your offices at Piper Tech. Is that right?
Back to the laboratory, yes.
And that you'd be arriving at about 6:30?
Somewhere around there.
And you brought all the evidence that had been collected that day into the evidence processing unit?
Correct?
And there are two entrances to that unit, are there not?
Yes?
One is a door for which you need an ID card to get in and out of,
Correct?
and the second entrance is a garage door, is that right?
It is a roll-up door, yes.
And, for instance, if I were to enter the evidence processing unit with you, and you put up your card to gain access, I would not have to put up my card to go in with you, would I?
No, you would not.
And if once inside someone opened that roll-up door, then other people could come and go from the evidence processing unit through that large door, which is big enough for a car or a truck. Is that right?
Correct?
Now, you said that when you got back to the evidence processing unit, the items were taken out of the coin envelopes for drying. Is that right?
Correct?
And if they were still wet when they were taken out of the plastic bags, then there would be transfer stains on those plastic bags. Is that right?
Yes?
Did you preserve the plastic bags?
No?
Were you trained to throw them out?
Yes?
By the way, did you or Dennis Fung save the black plastic trash bag that you were seen carrying items out of Rockingham that afternoon?
No, I do not believe so.
And you said that you and Mr. Fung began to put the wet swatches into the test tubes. Is that right?
Correct.
And are the test tubes marked at that point?
We marked them, yes.
And the test tube was then put back in the same little brown coin envelope. Isn't that right?
Correct, corresponding to its item number.
And you do that because the original coin envelope contains the markings to enable you to identify the swatches you collected from other drops at different scenes.
They correspond to the item numbers that are also written on the test tubes.
And I believe it's your testimony on direct examination that at least with respect to some of the bloodstains, you personally removed the swatches from the plastic bags and put them into test tubes. Isn't that right?
On a few of them, yes.
And you processed that evening both the Rockingham and Bundy items at the same evidence processing unit.
Correct.
Did you place a sheet of paper on the table before you began to transfer the swatches from the plastic bags to the test tubes?
I don't remember if we did or not. We might have.
Did you receive any training at the SID Mini Academy on the necessity of placing a sheet of paper on the laboratory counter before working with the different items?
For Mr. Fung's procedure, the swatches and envelopes are not in contact with the table.
For the procedure that you utilized, Ms. Mazzola, didn't you have to actually use an item to scoop things out of the plastic bag?
I used a glass pipette to move the swatches into the mouth of the test tube.
Okay. And haven't you been taught to put down some paper just for safety precautions, just to avoid an accident of a wet, bloody swatch falling onto the table?
The swatches were never where they could fall on the table.
Was this exercise done over a table?
Yes?
And did you wear a pair of gloves for the removal of the swatches from the plastic bags?
I did, yes.
And did you wear the gloves for the same reason that you wore the gloves at the crime scene, namely as a safety precaution for yourself?
It's just a force of habit to wear the gloves.
And so, do you have any independent recollection as to changing your gloves between the handling of each item that evening?
Independent recollection, no, I don't recall.
And the samples from both locations, that is Rockingham and Bundy, were processed in the same room at the same time. Is that correct?
I was working at a different table than Mr. Fung, and after a few, I just started labeling the test tubes for him.
Well, when you started working at a different table, were you working on the samples from Rockingham or Bundy as opposed to Dennis Fung working on samples from the other location?
We worked on samples from the same location.
And then the samples from both locations are then laid out on a carton. Is that right?
Correct.
And you would lay them out on the bottom of this carton until the bottom is covered with envelopes. Is that right?
Not completely covered, no.
Well, I mean, you left some space.
There had to be some space left, yes.
And you said all the Bundy bloodstains were put into a brown shopping bag back at Bundy. Is that right?
A brown paper bag, yes.
And a brown paper bag was used for the Rockingham samples as well. Is that right?
Correct.
One moment. Did you watch Dennis Fung do his procedure after you stopped doing yours?
I wasn't watching him constantly.
But were you watching him some of the time?
Some of the time, yes.
Did you ever see, when he actually would take the test tube and scoop it right into the plastic bag to scoop out the individual swatches? Is that how he did it?
He maneuvered the swatches from the outside of the bag rather than place anything in the bag itself.
Well, the swatches were still wet, weren't they?
Not necessarily wet, slightly damp, yes.
Well, some of them sticking to the sides of the plastic bag?
A few, yes.
And to get those swatches that are sticking to the plastic bag, did he use the tube to sort of scoop them out?
No, he would manipulate the plastic bag itself to move the swatches down.
Is it possible that when he did this, that blood would sometimes collect on the outside lip of the test tube?
Calls for speculation.
Sustain.
When the test tube is then placed in the coin envelope, is the lip of the test tube sticking out?
Yes,
And the envelope itself is left open in the carton, is it not?
yes.
Has anyone at the SID taught you that when blood on the test tube or on the lip of the test tube dries, it can flake or aerosol?
As soon as that's not known.
Sustain.
Have you ever been taught anything about the dangers of, or the possibility, withdrawing. Have you received any training at all about potential contamination which can occur as the blood dries in those test tubes when the envelope is left open?
Still assumes facts, not evidence.
Call roll. Have you received any such training?
No.
Then you left these envelopes in the carton in a cabinet in the room, correct?
Correct?
The cabinet's not locked, is it?
No.
And when you left for the evening, did you take the clipboard, clipboard with the field notes home with you?
No.
Did you leave them on the table at the evidence processing unit so you'd have them out the next day?
They were left in the evidence processing room.
Now, the next day, you arrived at the evidence processing unit at about 6:52 in the morning, didn't you?
I don't recall the exact time I showed up.
One moment, Your Honor.
Certainly. Madam Reporter, till 4 for a break. Can we proceed with something else, Mr. Neufeld? Mrs. Robertson, 194A. I'm sorry.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, while they're looking for it, whatever time it was on the morning of June 14th, it was early, was it not?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you left the laboratory around 10:30 to go to the print shed with Dennis Fung to examine the Bronco, is that correct?
Yes,
And would it be fair to say that you were at the laboratory that morning before leaving to go to the print shed for 3 or 3.5 hours?
about, yes.
Now, when you testified, I'm sorry, one moment. No, this is only one. Ms. Mazzola, I simply show you, see if it refreshes your recollection as to what time you arrived. Offense exhibit number 1100.
All right, what is 1100? What is 1100, Mr. Neufeld?
What is it?
What is it?
It's a computer printout.
All right. Next question.
Okay. And when you arrived that morning on the 14th, didn't you and Dennis Fung participate in removing the swatches from the test tubes?
Correct.
And didn't you and Dennis Fung make a visual inspection of the swatches to assure that they were dry?
Yes,
And didn't you and Dennis Fung at that point separate the item numbers both from Bundy and Rockingham and be proceeded to make bindles?
the bindles, for the most part, Mr. Fung was working on. I was filling in the DR number and the item number that he was assigning.
Ms. Mazzola, didn't you personally prepare, that is, create bindles on the morning of June 14th?
We'll have to get a bucket of water for those things. Proceed.
Ms. Mazzola, this is a paper bindle, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And you create these bindles by simply folding up a piece of white paper into different sections, is that right?
Yes,
And then once you fold up this piece of paper, you then put the swatches inside, and then you fold it closed, and that's how you hold the swatches, is that correct?
correct.
Isn't it a fact that on the morning of June 14th, that you personally created these bindles for some of the items of evidence, for some of the stains in this case, and put swatches in them?
For a few of them, yes.
And when you, there was no particular way, I'm sorry, there was no particular assignment, was there, that you would only do certain select stains and he would do other stains, was there? I mean, it
No.
was broken up fairly randomly.
We were not assigned which stains to do.
And all you did that day is you and Dennis Fung simply divided up the test tubes containing these swatches and performed these tests at different tables in the same room, isn't that right?
Objection to tests.
Overruled. Overruled. Actually, no, sustained. It's not tests.
Test tubes, I said, didn't I?
No, you said
I
tests.
apologize.
Which-
In fact, what happened on June 14th is that you and Dennis Fung simply divided up the test tubes containing the swatches and began to process them.
I started processing, as I said, a few and then after a few, Mr. Fung was much faster, and I started helping him.
When you testified on August 23rd, did you ever limit your involvement in this case to simply a few?
Your Honor, that's improper impeachment,
Sustained.
you say.
Did you put down a sheet of paper on the table at which you were working when you began to process the swatches on June 14th?
Yes,
And again, was that done to protect the table so no bloody swatches would get on it?
and to protect the swatches themselves, just everything in general.
Were you ever trained to change the sheet of paper each time you moved on to a different item number?
The swatches never came in contact with the paper.
Ms. Mazzola, the individual bindles were right on top of the table, right on top of the piece of paper that was on the table, is that right?
Correct?
And then you would have to pull or use some instrument to get the swatches out of the tube into the paper bindle, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Is there any danger that any of those swatches could either miss that piece of paper that's a bindle and hit the table, or simply glance off the paper and hit the table? Isn't there a danger that can happen?
No.
Okay. So you would never change the sheet of paper between item numbers, is that correct?
That's correct.
Overruled.
And you also wore a pair of gloves for this operation as well?
Yes.
But you were not trained to change your gloves between the handling of each item when you were doing this procedure, were you?
No, because the hands never came in contact with the swatches.
Why are you wearing gloves, ma'am, in the first place?
It's just something that is routine that I do.
Wait, weren't you taught to wear gloves when performing this procedure, Ms. Mazzola?
I would do it whether or not I was taught or not.
Ms. Mazzola, were you taught to wear gloves for this procedure?
I do not believe we were taught to specifically wear gloves for that procedure.
Were you taught to wear gloves anytime you're handling bloody swatches?
A person does not need to be taught that.
And the reason you have to wear those gloves when you're handling swatches, even if you're using instruments, is because there's always that danger that an accident could happen and a swatch could come in contact with your skin. Isn't that correct?
It's possible.
Well, isn't that the reason for the rubber glove, to protect your skin from coming into contact with the bloody swatch?
Sustained.
Now, would you agree that just as there's nothing special about the coin envelope and the plastic bag, there is nothing unique or special about a folded piece of paper that becomes a bindle?
That's correct.
That without some kind of identifying markings on it, they all look alike?
Correct.
So you put the swatches that you removed from some of the test tubes into paper bindles that you had created, isn't that correct?
Correct.
And there were no photos taken of the swatches as they're sitting in the paper bindle before it's folded, isn't that correct?
Correct.
And there's no notation by you in any document at that point in time of the number of swatches that you're putting into each of those bindles, isn't that correct?
Correct.
And of course, you have never directed a forensic photographer to take a photograph of the swatches as they're sitting on that bindle before it gets folded up, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Do you know, as to your recollection of that day, were the swatches all dry as they were put into the paper bindles?
The swatches were all dry before they were put into the paper bindles.
Do you have an independent recollection of that?
If they were not dry, they would not be put into the paper.
That's your standard procedure?
Yes.
Now, to your knowledge, have any of the swatches been mixed up and placed in the wrong paper bindle or the wrong coin envelope, either accidentally or intentionally in this case?
No.
Well, item 11 is a stain that you collected from a wire at Rockingham on June 13th, isn't it correct?
Correct.
And you collected that stain with a swatch, isn't that right?
Correct.
And you moistened that Are you aware, as you sit here today, Ms. Mazzola, that a technician employed by the California Department of Justice tested the swatch that you put in the evidence bindle, and it tested negative for the presence of blood?
Sustained. Curious to disregard the implication of that last question.
Would you agree, Ms. Mazzola, that some swatches could get put in the bindle which has been incorrectly, accidentally marked?
No.
Would you agree, Ms. Mazzola, that without writing a proper documentation on each bindle, there is really no way to identify these otherwise unidentifiable swatches?
Overruled.
The bindles were marked.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, when you... Sorry, one moment. With respect to every bindle, Ms. Mazzola, that you personally folded and packaged on the morning of June 14th, didn't you write your own initials on those bindles?
On the bindles themselves?
Yes.
No, the item number.
Page 768. Line 19 to line 22.
You got that, Ms. Goldberg?
Yes.
Proceed.
Ms. Mazzola, again referring you to the August 23rd, 1994 hearing when you testified under oath, where you asked the following question, did you give the following answer? Question. And you also believe that the bindles that you packed that morning were also initialed by you? Answer. That's correct. Did you give that answer to that question just 2 months after, or 2.5 months after you were involved in packaging bindles on June 14th?
Correct.
And that's because on August 23rd, when you testified in this case, it was your belief that you had in fact initialed the bindles that you had prepared the morning of the 14th. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And the reason that you would put your initials, the reason that you would put your initials on these bindles is because you had learned that technique from watching other criminalists at the crime scenes that you had been present at. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And that you learned from these other criminalists, Ms. Mazzola, that whenever you personally create a bindle, you write your initials on the outside. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And isn't it true, Ms. Mazzola, that you were simply following the same procedure that you had seen these other criminalists use on the morning of the 14th?
No.
Isn't it a fact, Ms. Mazzola, that all the bindles that you initialed were put back in the original coin envelopes on the morning of the 14th?
I did not initial any bindles.
You're saying that your testimony, your sworn testimony of August 23rd is wrong?
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Were you taught, Ms. Mazzola, that to demonstrate a reliable chain of custody, the original paper bindles created the morning of June 14th, 1994 are retained for trial? Have you been taught that?
Not really, no.
Have you been taught that by keeping the original bindles, the police can show that the swatches sent out to other labs come from the original bindle that the evidence was placed in?
Overruled.
I do not know that.
Were you taught at any point, Ms. Mazzola, that at trial, by placing one's initials on the original bindle, it can be identified by a criminalist as the same bindle that that criminalist folded and personally placed evidence in on a particular date.
I was not told that, no.
Were you told that one reason to retain the original bindles is to refute an allegation that the original evidence had been tampered with?
No.
If you've been told that the practice of saving original bindles is a standard practice at the Los Angeles Police Department?
I had not been told that, no.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, what I'd like you to do now, looking at the envelopes that are in front of you, the coin envelopes, I would like you to produce those paper bindles that in your sworn testimony of August 23rd, you claimed had your initials written on them.
Sustained.
Ms. Mazzola, when was the first time you learned that the paper bindles that the prosecution intended to introduce in this case did not have your initials on them?
Since facts not in evidence, we intend to introduce them.
Sustained.
Ms. Mazzola, would you please now look through those envelopes and show this jury which, if any, of those bindles have your initials on them?
As I had said before, they do not have my initials on them.
And you know that, Ms. Mazzola, because before this jury walked in here today, you opened each and every one of those coin envelopes, didn't you?
I had known that my initials were not on the bindles before today.
When was it that you first learned that your initials were not on the bindles, Ms. Mazzola?
It was some time ago.
Well, was it after August 23rd, Ms. Mazzola?
It was after, yes.
Was it during one of the prep sessions with the prosecutors that you learned that, Ms. Mazzola?
No, I do not believe so.
Was it one of your superiors at SID who first brought that to your attention?
No.
Was it another employee at SID who brought that to your attention?
I do not believe it was another employee who
Were
brought it
you-
to my attention.
Were you shown photographs of those bindles?
No.
One moment. Who was it who first brought it to your attention that the bindles that the prosecution was saying were the original bindles did not have your initials on them?
Overruled.
I had seen a few of the bindles in serology, and they did not have my initials on them.
And when was that approximately?
I can't tell you approximately. I don't remember the
When you
date.
say you saw a few of the bindles, approximately how many bindles did you see?
I can't remember the exact number or even the approximate number.
Well,
It
you
was
said,
some bindles.
all right, but as you know, Ms. Mazzola, there were at least 30 or 40 bindles generated in this case, correct? By you on the 13th and 14th.
Facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Well, would you agree, Ms. Mazzola, that there were more than 25 bindles generated by bloodstain evidence in this case?
I did not count them.
Would you please take a quick look at your notes? Maybe that'll refresh your recollection as to how many bloodstained bindles were generated in this case.
It's approximately 35.
And you said you saw a few in serology one day, is that right?
Correct?
By the way, you're not assigned to serology, you're assigned to toxicology, isn't that right?
Correct.
Were you brought over to serology to look at some of the bindles that had been collected in this particular case?
I was not brought over, no.
Why were you looking at some of the bindles in this case in the serology laboratory?
Because I had gone over there to look at them.
And had someone asked you to come over to look at them?
No.
Well, how did you know that these bindles were out on the counter in the serology laboratory?
I saw them as I was passing by.
You mean, how big is the serology laboratory, Ms. Mazzola?
I don't know.
Well, would you agree that it's certainly longer than the width of this courtroom? The entire serology laboratory?
I don't go into serology a lot. I couldn't tell you honestly.
Well, just approximate. Would you say it's almost as long as this room?
I don't know.
Is it at least half the size of this room, Ms. Mazzola?
At least half the length, yes.
And there are many different workspaces in there?
There are the main table down the middle, yes.
And that table runs the entire length of the room, doesn't it?
Not the entire length, no.
And there are workstations around the perimeter of the room as well?
I don't know if those are workstations or not.
And Ms. Mazzola, the bindles that you're talking about are about this size that I'm showing you right now?
Correct?
I'm referring to bindles in People's Exhibit 1630D.
Approximately inch by inch and a half, 2 inches.
And is it your testimony that you just happened to be walking through this room and you noticed that a couple of the bindles that were on the counter somewhere happened to be from your case? Is that what you're saying?
I had seen them out, people working, and I went in to see.
Well, did you go in to see because you knew that people were working on the bindles in this case? Is that the reason you went into serology?
I saw they were working on something. I went in to check out what it was.
You mean you had no idea that what they were working on was this particular case?
They work on several cases,
They work on hundreds of cases, don't they?
probably hundreds, yes.
Right. But you walked in thinking that perhaps they were working on the serology of this particular case. Isn't that fair to say?
Yes,
That's what piqued your interest, isn't it?
yes.
But you said earlier that you had no particular interest in this case, didn't you, Ms. Mazzola?
I had seen my colleagues working on it. I thought it was this case. I just went in to see what they were working on. That's
And the
it.
reason you went in to see what they were working on is because you wanted to see work going on the case that you participated in. Isn't that right?
Not the actual work. I just was interested in what they were
Who
doing.
were the colleagues you saw working on it that day?
Oh, I can't remember. This was a while ago.
Well, was this this is after August 23rd, though, correct?
Correct.
And you don't remember which serologists were working on it that day?
The probative value of this line of questioning, I think, has been exhausted.
Ms. Mazzola, but needless to say, they were not working, I'm sorry, how many different bindles did you say were created in this case? Was it 35 or thereabouts?
Those,
You testified a moment ago to a certain number, and I don't recall the number. Could you
Those-
remember?
those were the number of the item numbers with red stains that were picked up.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that simply since Mr. Fung collected many of these bindles, or formed many of these bindles, and you made some of the bindles, that just seeing some bindles not having your initials on them would not necessarily be surprising, would it?
Yes,
I mean, accepting your testimony on August 23rd, one would expect to see your initials on some of the bindles and Dennis Fung's initials on other bindles, correct?
correct.
So simply seeing Dennis Fung's initials on some bindles that they were working on in the serology laboratory on a date after August 23rd did not cause you any alarm, did it?
Sustained. Counsel, we've covered this area.
Ms. Mazzola, did you realize at some point that based on your August 23rd testimony, that if the prosecutors could not produce the original bindles that you claimed you had initials, that could be devastating?
Sustained. Curious to disregard the implication of that question. All right, counsel, we're going to take a 10-minute...
I'm through.
You're through?
Yes.
All right. We're still going to take a 10-minute recess, then we'll conclude with Mr. Goldberg. I'd like to finish this witness today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a brief 10-minute recess. Remember all my admonitions to you. Ms. Mazzola, you may step down. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes. In the Simpson matter, all parties are again present. Let's have the jurors, please. Let the record reflect we've now been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Ms. Mazzola is again on the witness stand. Ms. Mazzola, good afternoon again, and you were reminded you were still under oath. And Mr. Goldberg, you may commence and conclude your redirect examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. I don't think it'll be too long, hopefully. Good afternoon, Ms. Mazzola.
Good afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Mazzola, as to the coin envelopes that you were asked about on cross-examination by the defense attorney, did you open up and look in every single one of these coin envelopes today?
Yes,
And where did you do that?
here in the courtroom,
Who was present when you did that?
the prosecution and the defense,
Was this something that was done on the record but outside the presence of the jury?
correct.
And did you take a look at the the bindles that were in each one of those coin envelopes?
Correct.
When you did that, did you recognize the bindles in each one of the coin envelopes?
I recognize them as to the item numbers.
Did you recognize the writing on the numbers as being either yours or Dennis Fung's?
For the item numbers, yes.
And on many of them, did you recognize Dennis Fung's initials?
I don't remember if I saw his initials or not.
Okay, let's take one of these items as an example. Item number 47, if I may. I'm not going to go through all of these now, but I'd like her just to
Certainly.
remove from item number 47.
I need a pair of gloves. Gloves?
Do you need gloves?
Yes. Thank you.
Your Honor, did you want to have her put something down on the court's?
Please, why don't you clear that box off, Mr. Goldberg, for us? Here's, would you hand me the towels? I mean, the glove box. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Item 47, evidence item 47 appears to be comprised of 3 coin envelopes stapled together.
Now, maybe you can just hold that up for the jury so that they can see it.
All right, Ms. Goldberg, you have to stand back.
Now, this appears to have quite a bit of writing on it. Did it have all that writing on it when you created the bindle initially?
No.
Can you tell us what writing was on it at the time that the bindle was originally created?
On this particular bindle, the number 112 and the initials DF.
And do you recognize that to be Dennis Fung's initials
Yes.
and writing?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't believe she's competent to testify that Dennis Fung's initials indicate that Dennis Fung created that bindle.
Overruled. The question was, do you recognize Dennis Fung's initials,
Yes.
yes or no? All right, that's where it stands.
And when you and Mr. Fung were processing these, was it his, was he writing on the bindles that he was creating, and you were writing on the bindles that you were creating?
At the time, I thought I was writing on the bindles I was creating.
I mean, the item number.
Oh, the item number?
Yeah.
Yes.
And when you went through these various items, did you recognize them to be the original bindles that were created by you and Mr. Fung?
When?
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
On the 14th,
Yes.
did you recognize them?
Yes.
Okay. Now maybe you can replace item number 47 into that corner envelope. Tell us what you're doing for the record.
Just placing the bindle back into the coin envelope.
Before we move on to the next bindle in item number 47, do you see the original coin envelope into which the item was placed on the 13th when it was collected?
Yes.
Can you hold that up so the jurors can see?
All right, is the actual writing on that important, on the face of that? I'm not sure that
Yeah, well,
1492 can see that.
maybe we should put that on the Elmo. Can you just detach that from the other coin envelope so I don't heat up the remaining items? Okay, this is the original coin envelope into which item number 47 was placed
Yes.
when it was swatched at the scene on June 13th.
Correct.
And you were asked about photo documenting these items. Was this particular coin envelope photo documented in any way on the 13th?
Yes, it was.
How was that?
This particular coin envelope, photo item 112, was the actual photo ID card at the scene for item 112.
So if we looked at the photograph for item number 47 that was taken at the Bundy location, we would actually see this photo ID number 112?
Correct.
And why is this particular coin envelope folded?
Because it was folded to be used as the actual photo ID card.
And have you recognized when you looked at the photo ID numbers that were placed on the Bundy Trail, for instance, were you able to recognize that those were in fact the coin envelopes into which the items were placed?
Yes.
Now, at the upper portion of this coin envelope, there's something that says DR and then there's a number on it. What's that?
That is the DR number that is assigned to each particular case, scene, sample that we get into toxicology.
And was that assigned and put on this when they were processed on the 14th?
No, that is bought usually by the detectives that are in charge.
Okay. And the item number 47, when is that placed on the envelope?
That is the property ID number that was placed on this particular one would be on the 14th.
And the 112 was placed at the scene?
The 112 was placed at the scene.
Your Honor, I'd like to take a look at another exhibit that's already marked as People's 48B for identification, but I'd like to put it up if we can simultaneously. Directing your attention to People's 48B, what is that?
That is item 112.
Okay. And can we alternate now back to the coin envelope, item 48? Maybe we can just do that a couple more times. Is that possible? Can we put those next to each other? Thanks. So taking a look now at the card number 47 and the photograph that depicts a card number 112, are those the same object?
Yes, they are.
When you got back to the laboratory, the item number 47 and the photo ID was added,
Right back at the laboratory.
and then the DR number.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Now, at the time that you testified at the Griffin hearing, you were under the impression that you had initialed the coin envelopes and the bindles, the coin envelopes in the field, is that correct?
Correct.
And I know we discussed this a little bit on direct examination, but why is it that you believe that to be the case?
Because at the previous scene that I had done, my first scene, that is the way the criminalists at that scene did it.
Okay, and why is it that you did not do that in that particular way on the 13th?
Because Mr. Funk said we would be working as a team. There was only two of us, and it had to be picked up by either one of us.
And similarly, you believed at the time of the Griffin hearing that you had initialed the coin envelopes that you created. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why did you believe that?
Because, again, that was the way it had been done at the first scene I had gone to, and I believe that I had done it on the 13th.
All right. And is it your understanding, based upon your training as a criminalist, that what individualizes the bindles in the coin envelopes is the handwriting number that is placed on by the criminalist at the time that they're created? What is your understanding as a criminalist with respect to what individualizes the bindles that are created by the criminalist?
It's the item numbers that are important, because the item number on the bindle ties it to the item number of, say, the blood stain that was collected.
Okay. Now, maybe we can take a look at the other bindle that's contained in item number 47. Maybe you can hold that one up for the jury.
It's a little hard to see.
Oops. And does that have some writing on it?
Yes, it does.
And what writing is that?
It has several initials, some dates, and 112C.
Okay, and is the 112C what was placed on there by Mr. Fung on the 14th?
Yes, it was.
Objection as to what was placed on by Mr. Funk.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
Well, you and Mr. Fung were working on these together, is that correct?
Correct.
Whose 112C is that?
Objection, Your Honor.
Abstain.
Improper foundation.
Do you recognize Mr. Fung's writing?
Somewhat,
And were you there when these were created?
yes.
Do you recognize whose writing is on that 112C?
It is not mine, it is Mr. Fung's.
Objection, as moves to strike the last answer.
Overruled.
Now, the other writing that was put on there, was that at some subsequent time by other people?
Yes,
Your Honor.
No foundation for that. Answer stricken, juries to disregard.
Well, did you see that writing being put on there?
no,
Okay, thank you. You can replace that item. And at the time that you were working on them, was any of the other writing on other than the 112C?
no.
Thank you. You can replace that item.
Seals.
She doesn't have any seals.
All right, with regards to this item 112, I'll direct Mrs. Robertson to reseal, restaple and reseal.
As to the writing that was on the bindle, did you recognize any of that as being writing from other people in your laboratory?
I believed I recognized a few of the initials.
Was there any writing on the item that appeared to be from people that were from an outside lab that you did not recognize?
Sustain.
Okay. Have you replaced those?
Yes, she has.
Now, you say that at one point you went into the serology laboratory and saw some of the bindles that you and Mr. Fung created in this case.
Correct.
Are you allowed as a criminalist?
Objection, Your Honor, as to the last portion of the question. It assumes facts, not in evidence.
Overruled.
Are you allowed into the serology laboratory?
Yes,
You have access to that as a criminalist?
yes,
Are the people who work in serology your colleagues?
yes,
Do you know, are you on a friendly basis with those people?
yes.
Is there any lab policy or rule that prohibits you from going into serology and talking with colleagues?
No,
When you brought the items back from the Bundy and Rockingham location on the evening of the 13th, how did you get into the evidence processing room?
I believe one of us entered the evidence processing room and opened the large outer door.
Can you open the large outer door from the exterior of the facility?
We cannot.
So you have to go in and go through the evidence processing room first?
Correct.
And what is this large outer door in the evidence processing room?
It's a large, heavy-duty metal door that is electric that can be rolled up to gain access to the room.
Okay. And when you went in through the large metal doors, did you bring the items with you, you and Mr. Fung?
That is how we brought them into the room, yes.
Did anyone else go in there with you?
No,
Is it possible that maybe some person ran in there and snuck into the evidence processing room and then hid until you and Mr. Fung left?
Objection, leading speculative.
Sustain.
Well, did you see anyone scurry into the room and hide, waiting for you and Mr. Fung to leave?
no,
All right. And when you left the evidence processing room, were the doors closed
the door was closed
and locked?
and locked, yes.
Now, in order to get into this door in the evidence processing room, do you need any kind of key or electronic device?
It's operated by a computer lock. We have an ID card that we must put over the lock for the door to unlock.
I wanted to take a look at the evidence drawing board. think it's Peoples 170 for identification. We happen to have that key card with you that you use?
Yes, I do.
Maybe you could just, we won't, don't worry, we won't mark it as an exhibit, but maybe you could just.
Please don't.
Or would you describe that for the record, please, Mr.?
Yes, she appears to be holding a plastic card that appears to be about 1/4 of an inch in width. Seems to have a barcode sticker on one side, and is approximately 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches.
Large credit card size.
Peoples 170.
All right, Peoples 170.
Ms. Mazzola, maybe you could just step down for a moment. Does Peoples 170 depict most of the major steps that are involved in the evidence drawing process?
Yes, it does.
And you were talking about how Mr. Fung was manipulating the swatches into the tubes in order to set them out for drawing. Is that depicted on this board?
Yes, it is.
Is that cell number 2?
Number 2, yes.
And when he did that, excuse me, when he did that in your presence, did his hands ever come into contact with the swatch?
No, it did not.
And after he does that, what does he,
Objection, Your Honor, and I move to strike no foundation.
Overruled.
and after he does that, what does he do with the test tube?
The test tube is placed back into the coin envelope corresponding to the item number.
And is the same thing then done for the control swatch?
Identical, same thing.
Now, when you are working on these items on the evening of the 14th, do you simply line up all the coin envelopes in a big row and then in an assembly line fashion go from envelope to envelope?
No.
Why don't you do it that way?
It's just as easy to work on one at a time. It's safer to work on one item at a time. That completely finished in the box before moving on to the next one.
What advantages are there to working on one item at a time in terms of making it safer?
You decrease the risk of getting swatches mixed up, getting your numbers mixed up, possibility that two swatches from two different items come into contact with each other or the same surface.
So you're only processing one item at a time.
Correct.
And after that item is processed and both the control and swatches are in their respective test tubes and in the coin envelope, what happens to the coin envelope?
Coin envelopes are placed in a shallow cardboard box for security to hold them together.
And where does this box go?
Box goes into a cabinet where the swatches are allowed to dry overnight.
Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to take a look at Peoples 171. It's the evidence packaging board.
All right, which item is this?
This is Peoples 171 for identification.
Thank you.
Ms. Mazzola, direct your attention to Peoples 171. Does this depict most of the steps that are involved in the evidence packaging portion of the processing phase?
Yes, it is.
And when you were talking about placing the items on a bindle, is that depicted here?
Yes.
And which photo ID number is that?
Photo 1.
All right, and how are the swatches placed on the bindle?
They are placed on the bindle using a long glass pipette.
Can you also do that simply by tapping the test tube onto the bindle itself
Can, yes,
in either way?
either way.
And what happens to the pipette if you use the pipette technique after you've done this?
The pipette's thrown away.
And the test tube?
Test tube is also thrown away.
All right. And what happens after those items are thrown away?
Well, the bindle is folded up and the flaps are tucked in to secure it.
And then what's done with the bindle?
The item number is placed on the bindle to distinguish it from any other bindle.
And do you also place a number to distinguish the control, or a little C to distinguish the control from the swatch?
Most people do, yes.
Then what's done with the bindles?
The bindles are placed back into the original coin envelopes, and the envelopes are then sealed.
Now, with this procedure, do you do this in an assembly line fashion?
No, one at a time,
And again, why is it that you only work on one item at a time?
for the same reasons as before.
Okay, thank you. You may resume your seat. Now, you were asked about looking at photographs in order to refresh your recollection, and specifically item number 47. I think it was photo ID number 112.
Correct.
When you looked at a photograph that refreshed your recollection, was that a close-up or a perspective shot?
It was a perspective shot.
And what did it show?
It showed the location of item 112 at the scene.
What was it about that item, if anything, that stood out in your memory?
Well, it was the first blood drop on the trail at Bundy.
And when you say the trail, you're talking about the series of dots that started on the walkway and ended in the area of the driveway.
Correct.
And what was it about that, the location of that drop, if anything, that caused you to recall that Mr. Fung had participated in swatching that particular stain?
Well, the fact that it was the first,
Beyond the scope at this point, I believe, of my course.
it was the first drop on the trail, and it was also at the corner of the house in the front.
Now, you were asked some questions about the blood vial containing the reference sample of the defendant. Did you ever touch that blood vial?
The blood vial itself, no.
Do you ever recall touching the envelope itself?
I don't believe I did.
So did you ever handle the blood vial?
No.
And to your knowledge, did you ever handle the envelope?
To the best that I can recall, no.
I just want to go back to item number 47 for a second that you looked at